All right, so let's get started. So I just hit record. So hopefully you got a notification to say that you are being recorded and you give your permission.
I did, yes.
Well, welcome. Thanks so much for taking time to come speak to me today. I wanted just to learn a little bit more about you, a little bit more about your research. That includes, we've both been working on this grant sponsored by Templeton Religion Trust for the past 3 years. So I'd love to hear more about what you've been doing for the grant, but also the kind of your broader vision for your research, and what gets you out of bed in the morning is apart from your young family. So I wanted to start just by kind of establishing your career trajectory. So your PhD was in Harvard University, right? Was that under Joseph Henrik, I'm guessing?
It was,
It was
yes.
under Joe. Okay. And then you now are at UC Davis, which is fairly close to me. And are you you're assistant professor, right? So you've just moved.
Yes, yes. We moved about a year and a half ago.
Okay. So
Almost 2 years ago.
you're in California, like me, although I'm obviously a different area than you. And I did look up your profile online. In fact, I'm going to pull it up because I want to share with you how much I love your profile picture and was really jealous. I know you just copied my signature line, but look at that. Having my Zoom link on my signature line is something that was you could copy, but I need to know who took this photograph. It's just like the most perfect profile picture I've ever seen. You have the trees, you're smiling, you look relaxed, smart yet approachable. The color of the turban contrasted to the color of the shirt. I mean, name your photographer.
I forget who it was. This was shortly after our daughter was born, or maybe right before. And so we were getting like other pregnancy photos or family photos. And um, I just asked if we could do some for my professional
Mm.
profile. Yeah, no, I agree. It came out really nice.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so maybe the trick is to anytime something happens, we need to jump in behind a tree and get some photographs taken. And I also realized as I'm saying this, and I'm sorry we're already going off topic, but when I said to you the turban's really colorful, because something else you do is you write articles for the media, right?
I do, yes.
Your latest one was why I wear the turban.
It was.
And
Yeah.
you talked about, I remember, the opportunity to kind of color up your wardrobe with the
Yes.
turban, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, no, yeah, yeah, yeah. The idea that the turban is an aesthetic object,
Hmm.
and it's a very interesting object. I mean, it's like, it's different from a shirt. It's different from pants. It like evokes something. It has its own, I mean, it's kind of weird for me to say it, but I recognize that it has its own kind of exotic appeal.
Uh-huh.
And so it's like an interesting, just stylistically, it's like a fun object to work with.
Yeah.
Um, and so now I do a lot of like tie dyeing of my turbans or painting on turbans or screen printing.
Is that what you've done right now? Are you tie-dye matched?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Both of these are, I tie dyed both of these. These are both indigo dyed.
Amazing. All right. Well, from aesthetically pleasing, color coordinated outfits, which are, also important to talk about. I wanted to talk a little bit about so let's go back up a little bit. So now you're in UC Davis, you're an anthropologist by training, and you've spent quite a bit of time in Indonesia, where the last kind of, I guess, more than 3 years, but was part of the field site from the Templeton Religion Trust grant. That's where you were focused. So could you talk us a little bit about you could either talk about the field site or the main research questions that you went in with. You pick.
Sure. I mean, they're deeply intertwined. So I first arrived at this site. So I work on the island of Siberut. It's in Western Indonesia. It's in what are called the Mentawai Islands. And so I first started going to the Mentawai Islands in 2014. I went with an interest in indigenous religion and indigenous law. And originally I was very interested in taboos, and then that expanded into shamanism and healing ceremonies. I still did some work in taboos, but also local spirits, witchcraft, local explanations of misfortune. And so the way that I think about my field site in connection to my larger research program. So my research program more generally is about why human societies seem to reliably develop particular practices and beliefs very consistently. So why is it that human societies everywhere develop institutions of justice and shamanism and supernatural beliefs, or in particular, maybe beliefs about supernatural punishment? Why do they have hero stories? Why do they have lullabies, et cetera, et cetera? And so I think that really nicely resonated with the grant, which we can come to. But so the way that I think about my field site in relation to that is like the field site is kind of an opportunity to really think about these questions in a focused ethnographic context. So my questions are, of course, very broad. You can think about my questions as like the forest, and then the field site is the opportunity to really examine the tree.
Okay.
And so, for example, I just had a book on shamanism, which is about shamanism across cultures, but I've really engaged with it and studied it in depth in this field site among several other contexts.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think the field site and my broader research program really nicely resonated with the grant because the grant is about what are called wild traditions in part. These traditions that seem to be focused about misfortune, but really seem to reliably develop and to have a lot of staying power and to be a part of our deep history and recur in small scale societies and also coexist with doctrinal religions and in a way that is just a different way of wording or packaging what I'm interested in. And in fact, I just had a review article accepted in BBS where I describe what I'm interested in and what have been called wild traditions as within the same framework.
Okay.
Um,
What's the title of it so we can
it's
look it up?
called I think it's called Subjective Selection Super Attractors and the Origins of the Cultural Manifold. It's a
Can
long
now I
title.
can understand why it took you a minute.
Yeah, because I also wasn't sure what came first, super attractors or
Is
subjective selection.
SSSR?
Um, but super attractors
Mm,
are in my mind or what I describe as these co complex cultural traditions which seem to reliably develop.
mhm,
So they are near universal and they're complex. So shamanism, beliefs about supernatural punishment, hero stories, all of these I describe as super attractors.
mhm,
And the collection of all of the super attractors
mhm,
is what I call the cultural manifold. This huge package of practices and beliefs of complex culture that really seems to almost reliably or almost has, it almost seems destined to emerge in
mhm,
human societies.
mhm. So
So yeah,
you're so
that's
you're asking these big universal, these big questions about kind of universal trends or universal patterns. And you're part of your research, I know, is big cross-cultural databases. And for this 3-year kind of Templeton Religion Trust grant, you've been really focusing in on this one culture in Indonesia. And earlier you'd said, they're the trees, think of them as the trees in the forest, right? I think you used that
yeah,
example.
yeah, I did use that
So what is it
metaphor.
about this particular case study, this particular culture, that really lends itself to answering questions about, I mean, even cultural attractors or the big questions that you have?
Yeah, so there are a couple things. The reason I originally started working in this site with the Mentale, or one of the reasons I was originally drawn there. So I work on this island, Siberut, and
Mm,
Siberut is covered with all of these rivers. And each river is slightly culturally distinct. There's a slightly different dialect, slightly different taboo system, slightly different tattoo system. Um, and so I thought it might be you can think of it as kind of a laboratory of cultural evolution where you can examine which aspects of culture are more stable and which are more liable to vary.
within
Um,
this particular region, right?
yes, yes,
And
within
for
this region.
people who don't actually know where this is in Indonesia, so whereabouts, because Indonesia is a pretty big place,
For sure.
whereabouts exactly? How do we orientate ourselves on a map?
So it's off the west coast of Sumatra. So if you
Okay.
imagine the Indonesian archipelago going from Sumatra all the way to New Guinea.
Hmm.
Um, it's very, very far west. So off the coast of Sumatra, you find this island, the Mentawai, or this archipelago, the Mentawai Islands, and then you have Indian Ocean. You have Indian Ocean all the way to Africa and Madagascar. And so for that reason, separately, it's like it's an amazing place to surf. I don't surf very much. Um, but like many people know the Mentawai Islands as
Okay.
really great places to surf because you have these swells that build up over the entire Indian Ocean and then break on the
Mhm.
island chain.
Okay. So lots of water stuff going on. We have surfers, we have researchers coming in because of the significance of the rivers.
Yeah. And then I mean, you also have researchers who go there. You have primatologists who go there. It has a bunch of really fascinating endemic primates.
Mm.
It's also, there are seismologists who are interested in it because of earthquake related stuff. But yeah, so you have these islands, the Mentawai Islands, and they're interesting in the Indonesian context or the Austronesian context. Um, because so the Mentawai are part of this Austronesian expansion. But when their ancestors got to the islands, they lost rice, they lost metal, and so if you contrast the Mentawai Islands with like the West Sumatrans or even the Nias Islanders, um, they are more small scale, more egalitarian, more subsistence, much they have they forage more because they lost these various technologies.
Hmm.
And so the Mentawe are what we might call forager horticulturalists. So they raise pigs, they raise chickens, fruit trees, the sago palm. So that's the staple of their diet. They also have tubers, and then they also forage quite a bit. Um, but a major reason that I was interested in working with the Mentawe, aside from the rivers, is that you also have a very strong indigenous religion and indigenous system of justice. For various reasons, they have kind of escaped the globalizing forces or the force of the Indonesian state. The Indonesian state has actually tried to clamp down indigenous religion, indigenous practice, but it was hard to enforce because the forest is just it's just hard to get Indonesian officials to live in a malarial swampy forest and
Right.
tell people to no longer practice shamanism. Um,
The ecological forces are too high.
yes,
The
exactly.
ecological barriers are too high. Okay, so I understand there's various factors in at force, in the land and the development and in the form of agriculture, sorry, of economy. So what exactly do you like? What are your main questions when you were there for the past 3 years? I mean, you could talk broader. I'm especially interested in the latest focus.
Yeah.
What are
Yeah.
the
So
what are the driving questions?
so for the last 3 years, I and my postdoc, Dimas Ramadan, he's an Indonesian-born anthropologist and folklorist, and so he's been my postdoc, and he's done a lot of the field work. Um, what we have examined have been different elements of how people understand and deal with misfortune, so especially the supernatural and religious practices, and then also how they contend with alternative explanatory frameworks that are coming in. And so those are both doctrinal religions, in the form especially of Islam,
Mhm.
but then also biomedicine.
Mhm.
And so, the Mentawe, when they suffer from illness, have explanations that they turn to. One is so the two that we focus for this grant are Kisei, which is coming into contact with a ghost,
Mhm.
and then Silakikio. And Silakikio is a particular kind of spirit. It's a forest spirit. And previously I've done work on another spirit, Sikamena, a crocodile spirit. Um, and so, yeah, people fall ill. They have a number of these explanations that they turn to. Um, and then they also reach out to specialists, particularly shamans or sikere, to treat them. And so we were interested in what do these explanations of misfortune look like?
Mhm.
um, and how are they contending? And in particular, we had three projects. The first examined, um, oh yeah, um, to what extent do explanations of misfortune encode ecological or biomedical beliefs, and how does that then impact the uptake of biomedical frameworks? So, for example,
Mhm.
uh, there is this whole understanding of Kisei when you get sick. It's because you have come into contact with ghosts. But we were wondering, um, do these explanations, are they not only supernatural, but do they actually track features of infectious diseases? So
Mhm.
when people, is the way that people think about contact with ghosts actually encode information about malaria and infectious diseases, the particular symptoms that
Mhm.
you have, the particular risk factors. And we find evidence that they do,
Mhm.
that contact with ghosts seems to actually the symptoms people associate with it and the risk factors
Mhm.
they think about actually seem to encode information about vector-caused infectious disease. But as a result, that makes it harder for people to uh, take up malaria as a biomedical framework and measures to address malaria. Because it's essentially like you already have a whole explanatory framework and a way of dealing with it.
Okay.
So if I
Okay.
come in and say, oh, there's this thing, malaria, and you deal with it,
Mhm.
the next time you suffer from that illness, you are going to turn actually to the explanatory frameworks that you
Mhm.
already have
Mhm.
these, what the grant might call these wild,
Mhm.
religious
Mhm.
explanations. And we find evidence that, yeah, people have these explanatory frameworks, and that actually makes it harder for them to uptake
Mhm.
malaria, and which contrasts with something that the literature finds more generally. I mean,
Mhm.
some of the literature finds this coexistence of
Mhm.
supernatural and naturalistic
Yeah.
explanations.
Yeah.
And although there does seem to be this coexistence, people are
Mhm.
willing to say, yes, it could be malaria.
Mhm.
Um, they are much more primed to think about it in terms of supernatural illness
Mhm.
and to deal with it
Mhm.
through supernatural means, if that's clear.
Yeah, it's absolutely clear, and and it's fascinating. And I'm thinking about the research that we did, and many other people have actually done similar research, where we asked about 300 people in Los Angeles who'd had a misfortune. Then this was over the COVID pandemic, actually. To attribute the cause of the misfortune. There were all manner of things. And it was biological misfortune or death. Um, Hannah Luckenheimer is actually doing her PhD on this. And so, we found what other scholars have found, most notably Christine Lagarde, which is that they're using the biomedical illness as a kind of proximate mechanism, but kind of drawing upon supernatural frameworks as the ultimate explanation, right? So, in this case, what we found was a very common pattern of, well, my mother in law died of cancer, but God decided it was her time to go, and God wanted to alleviate us from seeing her suffer more, right? So God is
Oh,
loving,
interesting.
kind, and is doing it. That's the valence we've, that's the characteristic. So
Yeah, the
what's
mechanism that God plays or acts through is this more biomedical or biological thing.
exactly this
Oh, interesting.
intentional positive stance, but and that was coexistence reasoning, right? And it seems like what you're saying is, I mean, it seems like, well, it's complementary in that context because they're kind of not battling for the proximate.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yes. Yeah, over here it's a battle over the proximate, where it's like,
Really. Mm,
like if you have a fever,
mm,
um, like uh, it could be malaria or it could be contact with ghosts, I
mm-hmm,
think is the way that people would think about it. And I'll say that people do, when we find what is the order of interventions that you try, people eventually will try the clinic and they'll try over-the-counter drugs, but they will first try shamans or other herbal remedies because the first model that comes to mind, the first explanatory framework in, in this proximate sense,
mm-hmm,
is a supernatural one, is
mm-hmm,
that you've come into contact with ghosts while
mm-hmm.
walking through the forest or while bathing at night.
So if I've malaria, right, and I go to the shaman first, I'm guessing that if the biomedical explanation is that I've got malaria, I'm going to make a really maybe a dumb assumption here. That's okay. That some other people listening might be making. Over time, isn't there this feedback loop that, well, the shaman's not physically, or maybe they are reducing the to some of the physiological symptoms, and so ultimately the biomedical, treatment, which I assume is some sort of medication, right? Is.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, you're saying like, why isn't it that you would have just essentially reinforcement learning, where things that don't work, I've learned don't work, and things that work, I learn more.
I mean, I preface it by saying it's a dumb question because it's a kind of very ethnocentric, assumptive question when, of course, we do things that don't, all the time. So, but I guess that is a question that you
No,
know,
it's an interesting question. I mean, and if we can assume your premise and consider what's going on. And I think there are two things come to mind. The first is so the mentality themselves will complain that if you go to the local clinics, they will only give you paracetamol.
right.
Um, so one thing is,
Mm,
they like paracetamol
hmm
because
hmm
for some things, it's a pain reliever. Um, but so one possibility is just like the clinics in this context do not actually have the capacity to treat malaria. Um,
Yeah, what is the standard treatment for malaria in these contexts? I mean, once you have malaria, you know, what is it? IVs? I mean, what do you actually do?
I assume you have to take some kind of anti-malarial.
Hmm Does it
I
work
mean,
though after you have malaria?
I assume so. I
Okay,
think so.
sorry. I mean,
Well, I think there's some things that are malarial, they're prophylactic.
okay.
And this is actually beyond my expertise. This is more things that Dimas has been focusing on. But yeah, my sense is that once you have malaria, you can treat it.
Okay.
Um,
Okay, so they do have exposure to treatment that's, tablets, over the counter medication like paracetamol.
Yeah, but I'm not sure the extent, and I wish Dimas was here to talk about this. I'm not sure the extent to which these clinics that you find in the interior
Mm, okay.
um, have the capacity to identify whether this is malaria and to treat it as such. And so maybe part of the answer to your question
Mhm,
is that there isn't that reinforcement learning because they just don't actually have the capacity even within a biomedical framework to treat it as such. Um,
mhm,
But the other thing is I think that a shamanic healing ceremony um, does a lot to provide therapy. Is it treating the illness as such? It's probably not attacking the plasmodium, um, but um, it's social. It involves a lot of physical contact. Um, it's very sensory. Uh, there's an enactment of a battle with the source of your illness. And I think all of that can have its own therapeutic effects.
mhm, mhm,
Um, now, I think we would suspect that if we assume your premise that the fever would continue. But I want to emphasize that it is itself compelling and therapeutic, and that might provide a form
mhm.
of reinforcement. But it's an interesting question. Yeah, no, it's an interesting question to definitely explore.
So, you're used to writing for popular media, right? And news. And so if you had to kind of capture the main takeaway of your research over the past 3 years, what would your headline be? What do you think your headline would be?
Well, so I mean, again, there are three projects, and we're focusing just on one. But if I were to think of the headline for this first one, I think it
Yeah.
would be something like, um, we would have to tweak it a
Yeah,
bit.
we're good. No, look, this is stage one and you've just submitted it. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but the general gist.
The gist would be something like local explanations of illness inhibit uptake of biomedical frameworks and interventions.
Mhm. I think that's great. I mean, it's certainly a lot better than that RBB article. What was the title of that one that's coming out?
Oh, the behavioral Bayesian
Oh
system.
no, I'm sorry. What was it? Oh, BBS.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's subjective selection, super attractors, and the origins of the cultural manifold. I think that's what it is. But of course, that's like for an academic
No,
audience.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But
But
I
even the title that I just gave you is like still pretty scholarly, but scholarly in the sense that it summarizes a quick takeaway.
Mhm, mhm. So there are contexts in which it seems coexistence reasoning are more is more likely or more favored, or the conditions are such that we would expect to see it, and there are some.
Well, the tricky thing is that I would still say this is coexistence reasoning, because it is the sense that people are probably willing to ultimately entertain that this illness could be caused by A or B, but
Mhm,
it's just because A is so much more salient,
mhm,
reinforced so much more, it's
mhm,
so much more kind of culturally central
mhm,
that B gets pushed to the side.
mhm. Okay.
So it's like people are able to entertain both. And if you do a Christine Lagarde study and give them a different options, I'm sure they would say, yeah, they're both possible. But
Mhm.
ultimately, when it comes down to their behavior
Yeah.
and what they have to choose on a daily
Yeah.
basis, they're turning more to this one.
I'm always fascinated by behavioral measures, and I love when behavioral measures contradict verbal testimony. I think in some ways talk is cheap and behaviors are costly. And so I
Totally agreed. Yeah.
like that you said, Dimitri's and I just ran a study at the Pope's funeral. Dimitris Sikalitas. Well, he would say it's Sikalitas. I still can't pronounce his name after 20 years. But we ran a study and people had to donate money. And one of the questions was, to check that they were actually there. What after the funeral, immediately after the funeral, what are you going to take away from today? What have you learned? And one person that I interviewed said, I have learned that charity is the ultimate in life. And then when we asked her to donate money to two charities, she chose zero.
Right.
So this to me makes me smile because it's the perfect. I mean, I know it's quite an extreme example,
Yeah.
but I love that you also are taking into account what people do. Um, so let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk about your kind of broader research agenda. And particularly, I'd like to talk about your new book that's just been released called, what is it? Shamanism, the Timeless Religion.
Yes, exactly.
And I know people pronounce that word differently, but because I'm from Ireland, I say shamanism and other people say shamanism. The timeless religion. So can you talk a little bit about, I guess I should actually pull it up, but while I pull it up, could you talk a little bit about the book?
Sure. Yeah. So the thesis is that shamanism
Mm-hmm.
um, is this hyper compelling package of practices and beliefs that reliably pops up everywhere. So, shamanism, I'm defining as a practice on the basis of three traits. Specialists who, one, enter these non ordinary states, sometimes called trance, ecstasy, hysteria, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Two, who in those states provide services like healing and divination, and three, who are understood in those states to engage with some kind of non-ordinary reality,
Mm-hmm.
gods, ghosts, witches, ancestors, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes shamanism is sometimes really thought of this as um, it has a lot of like primitivist or orientalist, archaic imagery. There's the sense that shamanism is something of the past or the far off. Um, but an argument that I make, and the central argument of the book, is that shamanism is not confined to far off societies or remote societies. It is ever present in human culture, that it probably characterized the earliest religion, but that it suffuses societies. It's near universal, including in modern Western industrialized contexts,
Mm-hmm.
and that it will perennially reemerge, that it is so psychologically powerful and attractive that humans will continue to reconstruct it and rebuild it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and in the book, I describe shamanism as it exists in many contexts. I explore it throughout history. Um, but just to quickly talk about the modern Western context,
Mm-hmm.
or the Western context more generally. So I think historically there has sometimes been this attempt to say like, oh, in Siberia you have shamans, in the Amazon you have shamans, in Korea you have shamans, but Pentecostal pastors are something totally different, or the Hebrew prophets are something totally different, or trans channelers that you would find in the streets of LA are totally different. Um, and I instead view all of these I mean, I think it's actually very hard to justify that distinction. I think all of these reflect this pan-human
Hmm.
appeal. Um, and so I trace these forms of shamanism, and then I also argue that there are all of these interesting analogs in modern Western
Hmm.
contexts, like money managers, tech CEOs from some perspectives. I don't think they're literally shamans, but I think
Yeah.
they use similar practices to present themselves as other or just different from normal
Mhm.
humans to
Yeah.
provide some sense that they can control the uncertain, that they can do the near miraculous,
Mhm.
to
Yeah,
kind of build up credibility and authority.
I've seen some of that in your popular media stuff, and it's fun. It's fun to read. Um, could you give us a kind of an example about what you mean by, shamanism isn't just one, like what are the kind of some of the key characteristics?
Yeah, so there are those three defining characteristics that I laid out. So the non-ordinary states, the engagement with unseen beings or agents, and the services like healing and divination. So these are, I think, are kind of the core of shamanism, but then you have a lot of features that reliably co-occur. So shamans often have dramatic initiations, death and rebirth ceremonies, or they might have some kind of really tragic illness, an initiatory illness. Um, they're often there's a really core to my story about shamanism is and the dramatic initiations that are a part of this is the sense of otherness, that this is a different kind of human. So with the Mentawai, where I work in Indonesia, there are normal people are known as simatha, a word that's also used to describe fruit that is not yet ripe or food that is not yet cooked. And shamans are sikere. They're kind of the implication is that they're matured humans, they're developed, they're cooked, they're ripened. There's this fundamental distinction, and that I think is a common perspective across cultures.
Mhm.
Um,
So,
sometimes that's yeah.
so going back right to the start, when you said there are these cultural attractors, things crop up time and time again. Now you're discussing, the book is called The Timeless Religion. So, what is it about human nature, or I guess how culture has developed, tends to develop, that sustains our generation or sustains these practices or these ways of viewing humans?
Yeah, yeah. You mean for shamanism in particular, or all
Or,
of these?
or shamanism in particular, yeah.
Yeah. So I think of shamanism as incredibly cognitively compelling, and I think there are a couple features of human psychology that it's tapping into or that it's resonating with. One is, when so humans really very reliably try to manage uncertainty in their world. This is what, a lot of magic is about this. A lot of what we call like superstition is about this. Many rituals are about this, from rain magic to, hunting magic. These are these are practices to try to tame events that are high stakes, but very ultimately difficult to control or manage. Um, and so what the shaman is doing is they're providing or offering a sense of this control, and they're doing so through the engagement with agents. So not only do we want to control uncertain outcomes, but as this grant so often focuses on, we tend to believe that unseen agents oversee those. So why did my family member get sick? Why did it suddenly rain? Or why is it not raining? Why are we struggling to find animals? It's because of gods or ghosts or ancestors or witches. There's some kind of agent in the world that oversees why uncertainty resolves in particular ways. And
Hmm.
so what the shaman is doing is they're providing a sense of this control
Hmm.
by engaging with these unseen agents. And the form of that engagement is actually incredibly diverse across cultures. So in some, the shaman might battle them, they might speak to them, they might become possessed by them, they might summon them, they might cleanse your body of them.
Hmm.
But core to all of these traditions is some kind of engagement with these unseen agents believed to oversee uncertainty.
Hmm.
Um, but then the critical thing, the thing that I think makes shamanism so special and shamans so special,
Hmm.
is that if, for example, Claire, you said, "Hey, Manvir," or if I said, "Claire, I know you really wanted rain. I can speak to the rain goddess," you would say, "Well, you're just like a regular guy. What gives you that ability?"
Yep.
Um, and so what the shaman, with so many features of shamanic traditions are doing is they are providing a sense that this person is different from normal humans. they've died and come back to life. They've had a ritual burial. Their body has been cut open and crystals have been put inside it.
Right, right.
They had some really dramatic initiatory illness and they were chosen by a spirit. These are these like fundamental
Hmm.
transformations or fundamental otherness. But then also in the moment, trance is kind of a drama of otherness. It's not only that I'm like, yo, what up, rain goddess? Like, bring back the rain. I'm speaking in a different voice,
Right, right.
a voice that is not mine. My eyes have rolled back. I'm frothing at the mouth or whatever. I've lost physical control of my body. I'm speaking God languages. It is clearly a kind of distinct form of being. And both of these, I think, combine to make it very much more compelling that, okay, this person has the capacity or is engaging with
Mhm.
these gods, ghosts, witches, etc. So it's those three things that I think are really critical here. Essentially, what we might call a superstitious or ritual psychology, a belief in agents, and then a sense that superpowers, like special powers, come when individuals are distinct from normal humans, maybe related to how we think about concepts.
Mhm. Fascinating stuff. Well, shall we take a look before we wrap up? So let me share my screen. I just pulled it up. So, I mean, it's on my Amazon page just because that's the first thing I pulled up. But this it is. Here it is.
Yeah.
As you can see, this book was purchased by me on
Oh my gosh.
20th, 2025, but I share that with you only to confess that I have not yet read it. And the reason is that I always use books from the library. I have the Libby app, which is the library
I
app,
said Libby.
and they have an 21-day return. So if I really love something and I want to read it, I buy it. But then what happens is everything that I have bought gets pushed down because I know I've got like 7 days to read this one and 12 days
Yeah,
to read that
right.
one.
Yeah, right.
So it is there. I can't wait. I just booked a trip to Seattle in 2 weeks. And so your book is going to accompany me on that. And I am really looking forward to reading this. I read the reviews of your book all over the press. And I mean, I am excited to get into it and read it and read the words that you wrote, basically.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Claire. I'm honored that you purchased a copy
Well, in May.
in May on the release date, actually, May
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
20th.
on the release date. Yeah, absolutely. And I was talking to, Harvey and Pascal, who are also on this grant, and we shared, oh, this has just been released. Look at this. And they were both like, damn it, now it's something we have to read. If the reviews were really crap, we wouldn't have to read it. But now it looks so amazing. We have to now read another book. So I imagine many people are going to be reading it. Congratulations on it. Congratulations on finishing the 3-year grant project. What is next for you? Moving forward, what's your next?
Right now, I'm thinking and reading and doing some writing a lot about mythology and narrative.
Mhm. As well
So,
as art projects and other stuff you've got going on your website. You put the rest of us to shame. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you
thank you, Claire.
so much for your time. It is Friday, so I'm going to tell you have a lovely weekend,
You
and
as
I hope
well.
you have a nice, relaxing weekend after all your hard work.
Thank you. Thank you
All
so
right,
much.
Manvir. Okay, take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.